Dropped sharply to the lowest level in 2 years last month.
The Consumer Prices Index slowed to 4.6% in the year to October, with the Prime Minister claiming victory on his target to halve inflation. Prices are still continuing to rise. The Treasury Minister, Gareth Davis, joins us now. Very good morning to you. What is food price inflation currently at?
Well, we've heard today that food price inflation has gone down to just 10.1%, which is clearly too high. And while headline inflation has gone down significantly from the peak of around 11% last year, and the Prime Minister has met his target of getting it cut in half, clearly we've got further to go so that families and businesses feel the effects of prices going down even further, and
so
we are very focused on that.
A family going to the supermarket last year, comparing that price to this year, it's gone up. I mean, food bills are still going up year on year by more than 10%. I mean, what are you doing for struggling families in the midst of an ongoing painful cost of living crisis?
You're absolutely right. Food inflation is extremely high, and it's very high across the world. Germany and France have had food inflation well above 15%, for example.
Yeah, OK, but we're talking about the people that you legislate for, people here in the UK. Their food bills are becoming, and in many cases already are, unaffordable. And you're going to, you trumpet the fact that the Prime Minister might have met his target. The fact of the matter is, people still have to choose between heating and eating because their food prices are so high.
Well, I'm the first to say, and I think I did say, that we're not complacent, that we need to go further on inflation. We clearly have acted to support the most vulnerable through cost of living payments. That's £900 of payments. We've introduced the energy price guarantee through the worst of the energy bill crisis, but effectively paying half of people's energy bills. One act, by the way, that the OBR said would cut around 2% off headline inflation. So we have acted. The IMF have literally said that the government have taken decisive action to bear down on inflation and to support the Bank of England, who have the primary lever, which is monetary policy through interest rates. But as I said, I am the first to say that, yes, it's very good news that we've delivered what we wanted to do, which is to halve headline inflation, but we've got to keep going. We've got to stay vigilant to inflation because it does affect families very adversely.
Well, and it's interesting that you, of course, reference the Bank of England because this comes at a cost, doesn't it? This is partly as a result of the Bank of England putting up interest rates. Interest rates are for many people unaffordable. If you're coming off a fixed rate mortgage, that also looks unaffordable. I ask again, what are you going to do for people who are still struggling with their bills? There's an autumn statement coming up. What do you think the Chancellor can do to ease the burden? Bearing in mind, at the same time, this is one of the biggest tax burdens we've had for decades. What good news can you give the British public?
Well, we've already announced £94 billion of support for the most vulnerable. I mentioned the cost of living payments. We have additional payments for pensioners and disabled people. We are maintaining the energy price guarantee as a safety net until March 2024 in case energy prices in particular continue to go up. So we've acted very decisively. We've put a lot of money to work in the form of £94 billion of taxpayer money to support families and businesses through the worst of the energy crisis. And we keep these things under review.
You're 20 points behind in the polls, don't you? I mean, this, the cost of living is the biggest issue for people. Those measures are not touching the sides.
Well, we've always been very clear that the number one thing that we can do for families is get inflation down. And as you have reported today, inflation is the lowest it's been all year. It's down to 4.6% from a high of nearly 11%. We have further to go, but this is the number one priority. This is the thing that will get our economy growing and make families feel better. And we are on course to keep it going down. Inflation rarely goes down in a straight line, so we are not complacent, but we have to recognise that it is a good day for families when inflation is on a right trajectory downwards, and we will keep going with that.
Just to check one other thing on inflation, there's some speculation in the newspapers today that next week in the autumn statement, the Chancellor might decide to break with the practice of many decades in our country and not uprate benefits by the inflation rate in September, but instead choose to use the October inflation rate because that is lower and therefore would reduce costs to the Treasury and mean a lower increase in benefits, including pensions potentially under the triple lock. Can you just rule that out? Can you just tell us that the Chancellor is not going to renege on decades of past practice and that he will be using the September numbers for uprating?
Well, Ed, you will know better than anybody. I'm not going to speculate what may or may not be in the autumn statement.
Close down the speculation.
I'm not going to speculate on what may or may not be in the autumn statement, but I would point out that we did uprate benefits by quite some considerable margin, you'll remember, earlier this year, but it is not appropriate for me to comment ahead of the autumn statement next week.
So it is possible the Chancellor could decide to break with the practice of past decades, actually, and uprate on this month's inflation rather than September, because that would save money. It's possible.
We've already uprated benefits quite significantly in line with inflation, but I'm not going to comment on what may or may not be in the autumn statement next week.
I think you have the unintended effect there of feeding the speculation rather than closing it down, but I understand the difficult position you're in. Let me just ask you about, you've been in politics for a few years. You'll have been a student of politics for many decades. Have you ever seen in your lifetime a letter from a retiring senior cabinet minister anywhere like the coruscating attack on the Prime Minister that the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, published last night? Have you ever seen anything like it before?
Well, it's clearly a very personal letter. I must say I don't recognise the characterisation of the Prime Minister that was contained within that letter. I've known and worked with him over the years, and I know him to be somebody who delivers. He's somebody that acts on what he says he's going to do, and inflation today is a clear example of that. So it is clearly a personal letter, and that's a matter for her.
So you've served in the government with the former Home Secretary over the last year. How would you explain to our viewers why she has said these things? You'll have seen her up close and personal over the last year. What is it about her which means she is taking such a radically different approach to the one you're taking? She's calling him weak, breaking his promises, hasn't got a grip, all over the place. Why would she say these things? She was the Home Secretary of our country until 2 days ago.
Well, you'll have to ask her, Ed, as to why she's written what she's written. But as I say, I don't recognise the characterisation contained within the letter. Clearly, reshuffles are very difficult, and some people will be very disappointed by the decisions the Prime Minister has taken. But clearly, he has put together a cabinet of all the talents, drawing on strengths from a very broad church party. And we now have a cabinet in place that will speak with one voice and be completely unified ahead of the next election.
He's brought in Esther McVey as a common sense minister. A lot of people would say it would be common sense to announce a general election. Is that the first thing she's going to do?
Well, it's entirely the gift of the Prime Minister to decide when the next general election is, but what we are focused on is delivering for British people, not least with the cut in inflation today, but whether it's tackling small boats or putting in place measures to grow our economy, we are focused on what matters to people most. When are you going to give
the British people the opportunity to decide if you're delivering for the British people?
We'll do it in the normal way. I don't think it's appropriate for me to speculate on when the next general election will be. That's entirely up to the Prime Minister. But I can tell you he is ultimately focused on delivering on the commitments he's made to the British people. And today's announcement on inflation is a clear example of that delivery.
Do you think that it is a common sense thing to hold a general election when there's been so much change?
we will hold a general election when it's appropriate to do so and when the Prime Minister feels it's right to call it. But until then, we've got a lot going on. We've managed to cut inflation down below 5%, which we said we would do at the start of this year. We're tackling the boat crisis and we're trying to grow our economy. So there's a lot going on that we're trying to do to serve the British people, and we'll continue to do that.
OK. I'm not sure what the Common Sense Minister does then in the Cabinet, but Gareth Davis, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning.
Thank you.